Lena and Mark never imagined that a tiny device could turn their lives into a waking nightmare. When an unmarked Apple AirTag appeared on their doorstep, curiosity became terror, and what started as a harmless convenience quickly became a relentless, invisible hunter tracking their every move. By the time they realized it wasn't just technology following them, it was something far darker. It was already too late. I woke to find a small, white circle on my doorstep. At first, I thought it was some kind of promotional gift or a prank. An Apple AirTag, shiny and almost innocent-looking, lying there with no note, no name, nothing to explain why it was mine. I didn't remember ordering one, and yet it called to me, curiosity gnawing at the edges of my mind. I picked it up, turning it over in my fingers, feeling the smooth plastic, the tiny weight of it. It was just a small gadget, harmless in appearance, but something in me hesitated. I set it on my desk and tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. Later that morning, I decided to activate it. The process was simple, too simple, and soon my phone recognized the device. At first, nothing happened. It sat there silently, innocuous, as if it were just another piece of technology. But as the hours passed, I started noticing subtle anomalies. My phone buzzed sporadically, displaying the location of the AirTag. But each time I checked, it seemed to be moving. I hadn't touched it. It hadn't been near me. And yet the dot on the map shifted from one side of my apartment to another. I told myself I was imagining it. Technology glitches, random errors. But my rationalizations were fragile, easily shattered by the unsettling patterns forming around me. Doors I knew I had locked were slightly ajar. Shadows flickered just out of reach in my peripheral vision, and the tiniest noises, a creak, a whisper of air, a soft tap, echoed unnervingly in the corners of the room. And always, the dot moved. Always. It was one step ahead, tracking me with a precision I could not understand. That night, I tried to sleep. I placed the AirTag on the kitchen counter, far from my bed, and drew the covers over my head, hoping to block out the unease coiling around me. Hours passed. The night was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the building settling. Then, at 3:17 a.m., my phone vibrated violently, jerking me upright. The screen glowed in the darkness, showing the dot of the AirTag in my bedroom. My heart thumped, loud and erratic. I sat frozen, staring at the desk. I had left it there. I hadn't moved it. I turned on every light, scanning the room in frantic circles. The small device sat innocently at the edge of the desk, its surface reflecting the bright glow of the bulbs. Nothing was there. Nothing should have been there. And yet the location on my phone insisted it was at the foot of my bed, exactly where I had been sleeping moments before. A cold wave of dread washed over me, seeping into my bones. I felt watched, hunted, a silent predator lurking in plain sight. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, a random malfunction, but the creeping terror in my chest refused logic. As I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized the horrifying truth. The dot on the map moved with intention, with awareness, with malice. And as I blinked, trying to will myself into calm, I noticed a small, almost imperceptible scratch on my bedside floor, one that hadn't been there before, a line that curved slightly, as though pointing toward me, and in that instant, I understood. The AirTag wasn't just tracking me. It had arrived for a reason, and it knew exactly where I was. I woke with a heaviness that clung to me like damp cloth. My body felt weak, but my mind was sharper, alert in the worst possible way. I went straight to the kitchen to look for the AirTag. It was not on the counter where I had left it the night before. My breath caught. I checked the living room, the hallway, the bathroom counter. Nothing. When I finally reached my bedroom again, my phone buzzed with the familiar sound I was already beginning to dread. The location was active. The dot glowed on the map, inside my apartment, right in the center of the room where I stood. But there was nothing on the floor, nothing on the shelves, nothing in sight. The thing was present without being visible. That was worse than any logical danger. I tried to calm my breathing, telling myself I had misplaced it, that I must have moved it without remembering. But my brain kept circling back to the simple, unbearable truth. I had not touched it since leaving it in the kitchen. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling watched. The air felt heavier, as if something breathed with me. The silence was so complete that even my heartbeat sounded intrusive. I tried to distract myself with normal routines. Coffee, opening windows, playing low music. But everything felt staged, as if someone else were observing me go through motions like an animal in a glass cage. Every hour or so, my phone would vibrate with a new location alert. The dot never left the apartment. Sometimes it was in a corner. Sometimes it hovered directly over my own icon on the screen. That was the one that made my spine tighten the most, when the dot and I became one. By midday, new details began to disturb me. Objects felt slightly moved, not overturned, not dramatically disturbed, but wrong in the way that requires familiarity to detect. A picture frame was tilted. A drawer that had been shut was now open half an inch. The edges of my rug were curled as if something had skimmed across it. I felt gradually pushed out of comfort and into a slow, unavoidable panic. As night approached, the atmosphere thickened again. Light seemed weaker, sound more hollow, and every shadow looked too occupied. I sat on the couch with my phone in hand, afraid to open the app and see where the dot would appear next. But I gave in. It pulsed in the room with me again, near the entry door this time. I stared at the empty wood and steel, waiting for movement. None came. I almost felt foolish for staring. Then I noticed something I had missed earlier. Faint, dusty smudges on the floor near the door, as if something small had been dragged across it toward my bedroom. I followed the trail slowly, dread growing with each step. It ended beside my bed, right where the first scratch had been. Only now there were more of them. Thin, deliberate lines carved into the floor, forming a shape I did not understand. I backed away, pulse hammering. The AirTag was not only tracking, it was marking. I barely slept after discovering the marks. My mind kept replaying the shape on the floor, those thin, carved lines that looked intentional, not accidental. In the morning, I stood over them again. The scratches were deeper now, like something had continued etching while I slept. The strange shape was beginning to resemble some kind of curve or spiral, but incomplete, as if still being drawn little by little each night. I didn't touch it. I didn't even want to breathe near it. I only stared, feeling an invisible presence hovering over my shoulder. I made a decision then. I would get rid of the AirTag, whatever it took. I searched every corner of the apartment with nervous, shaky hands. I emptied drawers, overturned cushions, rummaged through closets. The thing was nowhere, yet my phone kept buzzing like it was mocking me. I opened the app again. The dot pulsed right on top of me. I threw the phone onto the bed as if it were burning hot. The sense of being surrounded grew thicker, like being underwater with something circling close. By afternoon, my nerves were stretched thin. Every sound startled me. The crack of the pipes, the ticking clock, the faint hum of electricity in the walls. I found myself listening more than moving, as if sound mattered more than action. Then I heard something new. A slow, rhythmic tapping from the other room. Not footsteps, not random noise. A deliberate, spaced-out tap, tap, tap. I forced myself to move toward it, even though every instinct screamed not to. The sound led me to the walk-in closet in the hallway. It was dark inside, the kind of dark that seemed eager to swallow anything that entered. I stood still, waiting. The tapping stopped. My phone buzzed again in my hand without me realizing I had picked it up. I looked down. The AirTag's location dot now sat inside the closet with me. My skin prickled as if tiny insects crawled all over it. I did not open the door all the way. I closed it instead, backing away like I had just sealed something inside. I tried to think rationally, but rational thinking collapsed under the weight of dread. The AirTag was not just hidden, it was behaving with purpose, moving with intelligence. I couldn't explain that without acknowledging something impossible. I stayed in the living room until nightfall, exhausted but unwilling to sleep. I sat with the lights off, watching the faint reflection of the street outside stretch across the walls. Hours passed in silence. When I finally checked the app again, my breath caught in my throat. The dot was no longer in the closet. It was back in the bedroom. I stood up slowly, knees shaking. I walked toward the room despite feeling like I was walking into a grave. When I reached the doorway, I stopped cold. The marks on the floor had grown. The lines now formed a nearly complete spiral, but not just on the floor. The carving continued up the wall in clean, fresh scratches, climbing higher as if something unseen had stood there beside my bed all night, carving while I slept, standing inches from where my head had been resting. I couldn't stay any longer. The apartment had become a cage, and I knew it. I packed a small bag with essentials, leaving behind everything else, including the cursed AirTag. I convinced myself that if I left it behind, it would stop. Distance might break whatever connection it had to me. My hands shook as I stuffed clothes into the bag, folding them neatly while glancing nervously at every shadow. Each corner of the apartment felt alive, as if it were watching my movements, judging my choices, waiting. The ride out of the city should have been a relief, but the unease only intensified. I left my phone behind at first, thinking that it was the conduit for its tracking, the device through which it haunted me. But even without it, the sense of being followed never went away. Every mile on the highway, every curve, every passing car seemed like a potential threat. I tried to rationalize it as paranoia, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I could swear that shapes in the distance mirrored my movements, staying just out of focus, keeping pace with me. At a rest area later in the evening, I decided to check my phone. My heart pounded in my chest as I powered it on, expecting a blank screen or perhaps peace. But the screen lit up, and my stomach sank. The dot was inside the car, hovering near my lap. I hadn't touched the AirTag. I hadn't even brought it with me. Somehow, it had come. Somehow, it had followed. I slammed the phone shut and threw it on the seat, but the presence stayed. It was tangible now, pressing into my shoulders, weighing down on my chest. I tried to drive away quickly, hoping speed could create space between me and whatever was tracking me. But the moment I stepped onto the highway again, more dots appeared on the phone, hundreds of tiny glimmers moving toward me from all directions. They weren't confined to the city or the streets. They seemed to appear out of nowhere, converging as though they had a collective awareness. My pulse throbbed painfully, every nerve screaming danger. I couldn't escape. They weren't following me. They were hunting me. By the time I reached a deserted stretch of road, darkness had fully swallowed the surroundings. The rest area had faded behind me, the lights extinguished, but the dots persisted, clustered like stars forming constellations around the car. I realized with a deep, bone-chilling horror that these weren't just devices. They weren't just tracking tools. They were extensions of something alive, something patient, organized, and infinitely relentless. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that exhaustion had cracked my perception, but deep down, I knew the truth. I was being stalked by a force that had learned, adapted, and multiplied. I stopped the car on the shoulder, heart hammering, hands shaking uncontrollably on the wheel. The air inside the vehicle felt heavier, thicker, almost wet. I leaned forward, trying to peer through the windshield, but the darkness outside offered nothing but the faint glow of the dots converging on me. Panic set in fully. I wanted to run, to hide, to scream, but I realized there was nowhere left to go. The realization settled in like ice in my veins. This was no ordinary tracking device, no simple gadget. Whatever it was, it had followed me, and it wasn't done. I reached a cheap, forgotten roadside motel near midnight, desperate for shelter even if only for a few hours. The room smelled of mildew and old neglect, but I didn't care. I locked the door, dragged a chair under the handle, checked every corner twice, and collapsed onto the bed without even removing my shoes. I didn't want to see my phone, but leaving it face down on the table didn't silence the dread inside me. Something had crossed a threshold the moment those dots multiplied. I wasn't just followed anymore. I was claimed. Sleep never really came. It was more like slipping in and out of dark, shallow states where time dissolved. When I opened my eyes again, the room looked different. Not physically. Objects were where I left them, but the air felt charged, like static waiting to discharge. Silence pressed against the walls, thick and unnatural. Then, from somewhere inside the room, I heard the faintest metallic buzz, short, soft, pulsing. My entire body froze. I didn't need to look to know what it was. Something else had entered. I sat up slowly, forcing myself to breathe. When I finally picked up the phone with trembling hands, the screen lit brightly in the dark, and I nearly dropped it. The map was open. The dot wasn't just inside the motel room, it was directly over my body icon. Then more dots appeared. First 2, then 5, then dozens. They circled the room shape on the screen, closing in like a tightening noose. They weren't icons anymore. They looked like eyes staring in. I stood up without thinking, my knees weak, but moving on instinct. I needed to leave again. I grabbed my bag and rushed for the door. The chair scraped across the floor as I shoved it aside. I unlocked the bolt with shaking fingers and pulled the door open. But I stopped dead. Outside the room, the parking lot was not empty. Dozens of small white shapes littered the ground, Airtags, scattered like bones, some cracked open, some blinking faintly, all facing the door as if waiting for me to appear. I slammed the door shut, trapped again. Panic clawed up my throat. I backed away slowly, holding my phone like a useless weapon. That was when I noticed movement, not outside, but inside. The sound was barely audible at first, like plastic shifting on wood. I turned toward the nightstand, and my blood went cold. Airtags were crawling up the legs of the table, hundreds of them stacking, clicking softly, climbing with insect-like precision. They shouldn't move at all, yet they scaled the furniture as if pulled by invisible threads. They began forming a shape on the wall, just as the carvings had in my apartment, curling into that same spiral, only now more complete, more perfect, more intentional. I pressed myself into the corner, whispering breath instead of words, watching them align into something readable, something deliberate, as if they were finally ready to reveal their purpose. Before the last piece connected into place, my phone vibrated one final time. A notification appeared, simple and sharp. Owner found. And below it, another line appeared without delay, written as if by an unseen hand. Moving to final location. The spiral on the wall was still unfinished, and whatever needed to complete it had just begun walking toward me, unseen and closing in.